Hello. Welcome to Keys to the Kingdom. I'm Marissa, and I'm finally back on here. I'm really sorry about the delay because it's taken me about an hour just to fight with Facebook and this program that I use um, to get in here. I'm not a self-taught technical person, and also Facebook is, part of the Communist Party, so they're very strict on so many different things, and they have shut down another account that I created because, you know, my account has been in Facebook jail for so many different reasons. So, um, not only did they shut that account down from being able to do anything for no reason at all. I don't even post on that account. I just use it for a backup account in case Facebook shuts my account down. And and Facebook has also been knocking people off of the Keys to the Kingdom page. If you get knocked off the page, it wasn't me. I didn't take you off the page. Facebook just every day knocks people off. I don't have hardly any more viewing. I don't know why I haven't posted anything political or uh, even, remotely. I never even got a notification. However, they have more and more and more. They just slowly knock people off the page, and I'll even find out and contact one of the people, because I can go through past posts and see who they're knocking off, and I'll contact them and I'll say, "Hey, did you unlike the page?" And they'll say, "No. No, I didn't unlike the page." And I said, "Well, you're not on the page anymore because Facebook's taking people off. They just pluck people off one by one." It's great. It's fabulous. So, hey, Crystal. I'm so glad you could make it. I'm so glad I could make it. I'm so glad. I'm surprised anybody can see this video as much as Facebook is censoring the page. And honestly, it's like this page doesn't even have that many people on the page. Like, it doesn't even have millions of people. It doesn't even have Keys to the Kingdom doesn't even have hundreds of thousands of people. Yet they are daily plucking people off the page, and they're not showing the posts to anyone anymore. So that's how it's going. Hey, LaShawn. Good to see you, sweetie. I'm so glad you could make it. Thank you for waiting. I was an hour of struggling with Facebook, and then they shut down the other page because I guess they saw me trying to log in through this video program that I use to go live. And so now Facebook will not let my other page or my other account do anything with the page unless I give them a photocopy of a driver's license or a what was the other one? Like a passport. It's so unbelievable. I cannot believe we don't have any other choices besides Facebook. Like, I'm not on Instagram. I am not on TikTok, or what else is out there? Snapchat. I'm not on any of those things. And honestly, Facebook is the only reason I'm still on Facebook is because there's nothing like Facebook yet, and I just don't understand why we don't have a social media platform that doesn't ask you for your driver's license and your passport to make sure that you are who you are and whatever. Anyways, so almost a year ago, I think July was the last time I did a video, or that we did a study together, was last July, and we were in Leviticus. And just recently, in the past couple months, with, of course, this always happens, that when the holy feast days come, when the high holy days come, like Passover and first fruits, unleavened bread, and Shavuot and stuff, and I put anything on the page about that, I get a lot of people who start talking about the law and, why we don't have, and a lot of people just I mean, it's sad because a lot of people just automatically say what they've heard. A lot of people just automatically say, we're not under the law. The law was nailed to the cross, even though the Bible doesn't say that. It says our sins was nailed to the cross. And they'll just regurgitate these things. And the thing is 99.9999999% of these people have never even read Leviticus. They don't even know what laws they're referring to when they say we're not under the law, we're under grace. Even though grace was in the beginning, grace didn't just appear out of nowhere when Yeshua was, walking the earth. So it's unfortunate because they're saying things, or they're, messaging me all of this very, very strong emotional opinions, and they've never even read Leviticus. They don't even know which laws they're supposedly so against, or they think God is so against that he had to do away with them. So it's kind of sad. So if you just take a moment to really go through Leviticus, which we were starting to, we went through chapters 1 through 10 back in July of last year. And unfortunately, my dad passed suddenly, and I just had nothing. Like, it's not like, obviously, he passed very suddenly. It was very sudden. Like, it was not expected. And it's not that I even was, of course I was grieving, but I just didn't have anything. Like, there was nothing coming out of me. Like, there was nothing. So I just, I had to take some time, and then I, took some months to grieve, and then come, towards the beginning of the new year, 2022, my grandmother, who I'm very, 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 very close with, we are interwoven very tightly, my grandmother and I, this particular grandmother. And she had a major stroke. Of course, she's 91, and I understand, we all have to go sometime. It just was one thing after another. So I'm, sometimes I used to get on here and say, oh, I'm gonna do a book giveaway, and I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that, but I feel like every time I do that, something happens to stop me. So sometimes I'm reluctant to even say what the plan is, because I don't want to have to take it back. I don't know. Didn't Yeshua say something like, don't say tomorrow we'll go here and tomorrow we'll go there and we're going to do this. Just say, if it's God's will. God's willing, that's what we'll do. But if God is willing, and it is his plan, and it is his time, I am going to be doing a book giveaway in the new Facebook group called Keys to the Garden. I'm going to be doing a video in there, and on that video, I'll be doing a book giveaway that I really think you're going to enjoy. And you're going to enjoy it even if you don't think you have a green thumb. That's okay. But it's going to tie in to the word. It's going to tie in actually to one of the Psalms. And it's very beautiful. But my main purpose for creating the Keys to the Garden, there's a few reasons. Number one, and probably first and foremost, they're all important, but I really want to encourage people to start growing food. Even if it's just one thing at a time. There's no such thing as being born with a green thumb. There's, people say, oh, I kill plants. I don't have a green thumb. It's something you have to learn. It doesn't come natural. You have to learn what a plant's needs are, and, what to feed it, how much water, where does it need to grow, when to plant it, because you can't grow everything at the same time typically. So that's my first reason for creating Keys to the Garden group, which I'm actually going to be putting an extreme amount of focus on that in the near future. presently, actually. And so I want to encourage people to start growing your own food. Yes, it's healthier, but over the past couple years, actually, there's been a lot of talk about food shortages, particularly from some sources that I follow. They're saying that by this summer, there's going to be some major shortages. And there's actually been these farms that are mysteriously catching fire and everything is gone. So, whether it's this summer or next summer, I think you need to start now. You need to start now. And like I said, start with one plant and then, start adding whatever your comfort level is. I know that Crystal has actually started a whole laundry list of vegetables and fruit. And so if anybody wants to get together with Crystal, she's growing quite a bit of food at her house. And I'm very impressed. And I think that is pretty amazing. And even if you have a small space, even if you have an apartment, there's something you can grow. Trust me, it's easier than you think. Once you learn when to grow it, what it needs, it pretty much will run itself. But start practicing now because this will give you time to get acclimated to the different fruits and vegetables and herbs and stuff that you want to grow. My second reason for creating the group was actually so that you'll start a garden. Forgive me, I have a tendency to go off topic and just rant, and then I forget what my point was. So that we could, so everybody could share what they're doing, what they're growing. So we can learn about it, learn about different fruits and vegetables and herbs. I also wanted, so the book giveaway. Blessings to you, Mersada. So glad you can make it, sweetie. The book that I'm going to discuss in the group pretty soon is going to, that was my other reason for creating the group. Growing your own food, gardening, whether it's fruits, but honestly, there's something very different about growing edible food that you eat and cook than there is growing plants that you don't consume. Flowers are beautiful. They attract bees. I am just not interested in growing plants that I can't eat. We have a couple of plants that are, decorative, but they're very, very few and far between. Most everything in my yard, my entire backyard, you can consume. It's either a fruit or a vegetable or an herb or something medicinal. And then I have a few flowers because I want to attract bees and, so we've got some of that going on. So when you do that, when you start growing your own food, things that you can consume, and you're out there and you're spending time in the Word and you're spending time with God, it takes your relationship with God and the Word to a whole other level. I can try to describe it in words, but you have to do it. You just have to immerse yourself in the gardening, in the Word, and just there's times that I'm in the garden and the Word, Scripture just keeps like hitting me. I just keep getting downloaded with all these script, and it just connects you to God in a way that you otherwise can't. And let me tell you why, because the entire Bible is written from an agricultural perspective. So because we live in a modern world and we are so removed from all the rest of history, basically, just 100 years ago when, my grandmother had a garden and they had victory gardens during the, World War I and World War II. you're going to, your relationship with God, I'm just saying that it's going to go to a whole other level when you're in the garden and you're growing stuff and you have to cultivate the ground. And so that's my other reason for creating it and wanting to encourage people to grow their own, food to consume. So this book that I'm going to give away in the near future, I won't dare say when, because who knows what will happen if I say a date. This book is going to tie in the part of the word that we're this part of Psalms, and the agricultural theme surrounding it. So it's going to be very beautiful. I hope you'll be able to join me in the Keys to the Kingdom group when I do that video and that book giveaway. It's going to be so beautiful. It just melts my heart. But today we are going to we're going to pick up where we left off in Leviticus. And I just thought this was kind of funny and appropriate because of, going through the whole Passover thing and everybody saying, oh, we don't have to do the law and all this. But, let's read these laws, these terrible, people think are just, I think they think that they must be like horrible, like burdensome laws. And they're really not. They're really not. I haven't found one law in here that sounds like it's a hard thing. Now, mind you, most of the laws in the Torah you can't keep anyway. First of all, a lot of them have to do with the priests and the Levites and the temple. So that cuts out like a huge chunk of the laws anyway. So without a temple, nobody can do it. Nobody can do it without a temple. But there's a lot of other ones that are there for our well-being. So we're going to go through those. Crystal says, I have a few flowers, but I grow food we can eat. Yes, I mean, that's wonderful. I love flowers because they're beautiful. I love flowers also because they smell good. So sometimes I make like skincare-ish stuff out of the flowers that I have. And of course I want, everything to smell good. So I love flowers that smell or are beautiful and they attract bees. But other than that, everything else I just want to be able to eat or cook or, make a tincture out of. So we're going to be going through Leviticus chapters 11 through 15 today. These are laws to live by. I just want to go through Leviticus and I want to really get through it because I want to make sure that we actually fully understand what's there. What are these laws that God gave the nation of Israel? And which ones should we be applying? And which ones, it's when you're going through them, there's some that are very obvious that they don't apply today. And then others you're like, yeah, we should be doing that. So let's go through these. And if there's anybody watching this who has always been opposed to, or maybe you're that person that says, no, the laws are done away with, let me know. I personally want to know, whether it's in the comments or send me a private message, which one, let me know what law you have a problem with, that you say, that just, that had to be done away with. I think Jesus just did away with it because it's terrible. Let me know. Maybe you're not fully understanding what the law was for. Maybe you're not fully understanding why it was given. Let's discuss it. Let's just see what was said. So we're going to go through Leviticus 11 through 15 today. Hi, Lynn Montiveros. Good to see you. Long time no see, everybody. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And if you want to read along with me, we're going to start in Leviticus chapter 11. And oddly enough, Leviticus chapter 11 has to do with the dietary laws. This has to do with what is food and what's not food. So let's see what God had to say about that. All right, so here in Leviticus chapter 11, you'll see it says clean and unclean animals. Because, as you can recall, even all the way back to Noah, or, maybe even further, but let's just go to Noah, because some say, oh, well, those laws, they were just for Jews. Well, wait a minute. Didn't Noah have to bring clean animals and unclean animals that he was going to sacrifice once he was out of the ark? But wait a minute. If it was just giving to the Jews and the nation of Israel hadn't been created yet, why would God be asking Noah to distinguish between clean and unclean animals? That's just something to think about. So here in Leviticus 11 it says, And Yahuwah spoke to Moshe and Aaron, saying unto them, Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, These are the beasts which you shall eat among all the beasts that are on the earth. Whatsoever parts the hoof, and is cloven-footed, and chews the cud among the beasts, that you shall eat. So basically, it had to have a cloven hoof, a split hoof, and it had to chew the cud. Okay, so it can't just be a split hoof, and it can't just be chews the cud. It had to have a split hoof and chew the cud. Nevertheless, these you shall not eat of them that chew the cud, or of them that divide the hoof. So, for example, the camel, because the camel chews the cud, but his hoof is not divided. He divides not the hoof, and he is unclean to you. So a camel is not considered clean, so he's not considered consumable food. And the kuni, because he chews the cud, but divides not the hoof, he's unclean to you, so it's not food. He chews the cud, but he doesn't have a split hoof. And the hare, because he chews the cud, but he doesn't have a split hoof, and he's unclean to you. So the hare is obviously rabbit. And the swine. Everybody knows about swine, but how many people also know about all these other animals? It's not just pigs that were unclean, although they became popular because most of the pagan nations liked to use swine and pig for a lot of different things and sacrifices. But there's all these other animals too that do not fall under the category of being clean, therefore being considered kosher food that's edible. And the swine, though he divides the hoof and he's cloven-footed, yet he doesn't chew the cud, so he's unclean to you. Of their flesh shall you not eat, and their carcass you will not touch. They are unclean to you. These shall you eat of all that are in the waters. So now he was talking about land animals. Now he's talking about things that are in the water. And he says, These shall ye eat of all that are in the waters. Whatsoever has fins and scales in the waters, in the seas and in the rivers, them you shall eat. So whatever has fins and scales. And then verse 10 says, And all that have not fins and scales in the sea and in the rivers and all that moves in the water, and of any living thing which is in the waters, they shall be an abomination to you. So if it doesn't have fins and scales, it's not food, it's not clean, it's an abomination to you. They shall be even an abomination unto you, ye that not eat of their flesh, but ye shall have their carcasses in abomination. Whosoever has no fins nor scales in the waters, but shall be an abomination to you. And these are which shall have an abomination among the fowls. Can I catch this on replay? Oh, of course. Yes, of course, sweetie. It'll be on the page, no problem. Okay, so now we're getting into birds. And these that are they which you shall have an abomination among the fowls. They shall not be eaten. They are an abomination. So the eagle, I think that's supposed to be like ostrich, and the osprey, the vulture, and the kite after his kind, every raven after his kind, and the owl, and the nighthawk, and the cuckoo, and the hawk after his kind, and the little owl. You can actually go back and look at a different translation if you want to see the different names. Some are translated a little bit differently, but basically these birds of prey you're not supposed to eat, and these other birds as well. The hawk after its kind, and the little owl, and the cormorant, and the great owl, and the swan, and the pelican, and the eagle, and the stork, and the heron after her kind, and the lapwing, and the bat. All fowls that creep, going upon all fours, shall be an abomination to you. Yet these may you eat of every flying, creeping thing that goes upon all four, which have legs above their feet, and leap withal upon the earth. Even these of them you may eat. So the locust, after its kind, and the bald locust, and the beetle, and the grasshopper after his kind. I bet you didn't know that God said that grasshoppers were perfectly fine to eat. And locust also. As you recall, Yochanan the Immerser, or otherwise known as John the Baptizer, remember he was eating locusts and honey while he was in the wilderness. But all other flying, creeping things which have 4 legs shall be an abomination unto you. And for these ye shall be unclean. So whoever touches the carcass of them shall be unclean until the evening. And whoever bears aught of this carcass of them shall we wash his clothes and be unclean until the evening. So all of the unclean animals, if they die, you're not supposed to touch their carcass. It makes you unclean. Okay. The carcasses of every beast which divides the hoof is not cloven foot, nor chews the cud, are unclean to you. Every one that touches them shall be unclean. And whatever goes upon its paws among all manner of beasts that goes on all fours, these are unclean to you. So whatever goes on all fours and has paws is not a clean animal. Obviously, we don't eat dogs. Not in America anyways. Whoso touches their carcass shall be unclean until evening. And he that bears the carcass of them shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. They are unclean unto you. These also shall be unclean unto you among the creeping things that creep upon the earth. The weasel, the mouse, and the tortoise after his kind, and the ferret, and the chameleon, and the lizard, and the snail, and the mole. So basically, rodents are not edible. These are unclean to you among all that creep. Whosoever touches them when they are dead shall be unclean until the evening. And upon whatsoever any of them when they are dead does fall, and it shall be unclean, whether it be in any vessel. Basically, if let's say a dead rat fell into a pot that you use for dinner, whether it's wood or raiment or skin or sack, whatever the vessel be, wherein any work is done, it must be put into water, and it shall be unclean until the evening, so that it shall be cleansed. You have to understand here, this is basically God just teaching his people, what is food, what's not food, and he's just teaching them ways of cleanliness. I mean, we've all heard the saying that cleanliness is next to godliness, and that's kind of true, but obviously, if you were at home and a dead rat, or probably even a living rat, fell into the pot that you were about to make dinner in, pretty sure you're going to wash that pot really good before you use it to make food. So this is just very simple stuff that he's teaching them. It's actually not complicated. He's just saying, okay, this is food, this is not food. This is what you need to do if you end up having to touch an animal. Because mind you, these people, they were encountering, snakes and rodents, and, they didn't have like houses like we do. So they encountered animals and dead animals way more often than we ever do. So he was just telling them, this is going to make things unclean because these particular animals, they carry, lice, they carry viruses, they carry bacteria, so they're not clean. He's just telling the nation of Israel things that they can't see and understand yet because we don't have, the scientific community to look at these things under a microscope yet. So it says, it must be put into water, and it shall be unclean until the evening, so that it shall be cleansed. And every vessel that any of these falls into, whatsoever in it shall be unclean, and you shall break it. Of all meat which shall be eaten, that on which such water comes shall be unclean. So, you know what? I'm going to change the version here because I'm not really digging this version. Hold on one second for me. Let's use let's use this. Okay. Okay, so here we go. I think this is going to be worded a little bit better. The Sefer, I'm not really a fan of the grammar that's used in the Sefer, so I'm going to switch to the Tree of Life version. Okay, so any food that may be eaten but has water in it from such a pot where an animal fell in will become unclean. So basically, if you had a pot that held drinking water and a rat fell in it, no, you don't drink the water. The water's unclean, and so is the pot. Also, any drink that may be drunk in any pot will become unclean. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure if a cockroach fell into your drink, you wouldn't drink it, you would throw it out, and you would wash your cup, I'm sure. I know I would. Everything on which part of their carcass falls will become unclean. An oven or stove for pots is to be broken in pieces. These are unclean and will be unclean to you. Mind you, when he says be broken into pieces, I'm almost positive that this has to do because of the type of material that they used for pots and things like that. It's not like we have today. We know we can just throw it into a dishwasher. Again, you have to put yourself back into that time to understand why God's saying what he's saying. I mean, he's not saying, just destroy your whole oven and stove, except for the fact that their oven and stove wasn't like the oven and stove that we have today. And neither were their pots. Nevertheless, a spring or a cistern for collecting water will be clean, though anyone who touches their carcass will become unclean. If part of a carcass falls on any seed for sowing that has yet to be sown, it is clean. So basically what he's saying, let's say you have seeds. I mean, obviously that's not going to do anything to the seed. So you can still put it in the ground and it will grow. It says, but if water is put on the seed and part of the carcass falls on it, it is unclean to you. So if you have dry seed, fine. But if they're wet, I think the moisture from the carcass onto the seed will probably make it unclean. If any animal that you may eat dies, the one who touches its carcass will become unclean until the evening. Basically, any dead carcass would make a person unclean. He who eats of its carcass is to wash his clothes and be unclean until the evening. Also, the one who carries its carcass is to wash his clothes and be unclean until the evening. Every creeping thing that crawls on the earth is detestable. It should not be eaten. Whatever moves on its belly, or crawls on all fours, or has many feet among all the creeping things that crawl on the earth, These you are not to eat, for they are detestable. You are not to contaminate yourselves with any creeping thing that crawls or makes yourselves unclean with them or defiled by them. For I am the Lord your God. Therefore sanctify yourselves and be holy, for I am holy. You are not to defile yourselves with any kind of creeping thing that moves on the earth. For I am the Lord who brought you up out of the land of Egypt to be your God. Therefore you should be holy, for I am holy. This is the Torah of the animal. Basically, this is the law of the animal, the bird, every living creature that moves in the waters, and every creature that creeps on the earth, to make a distinction between the unclean and the clean, and between the living thing that may be eaten and the living thing that may not be eaten. So basically, that which is food, that which is not food. Okay. All right. So, let's move on to chapter 12. Chapter 12 looks kind of short here. Purification after childbirth. So there was a process after a woman gave birth to a child that she had to go through. And, also keep in mind that Leviticus was one of the most important books to the children of Israel because it had all of God's instructions for living. And when you really go through and read Leviticus and understand these laws, you're going to understand a lot of other things in the Bible that otherwise you might be kind of scratching your head. You're also going to understand a lot of things that Yeshua did and why he did them. When you understand, God's laws for Israel, it's obviously helpful to understand what Yeshua was doing, what he came against, and what he didn't come against. But back to Leviticus 12. So there's laws for purification after childbirth, and there's a little bit different instructions for when you are giving birth to a female versus giving birth to a male. And this says, "And then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the sons of Israel, instructing, if a woman conceives and bears a male child, then she will be unclean for 7 days." So if she gives birth to a male child, she's unclean for 7 days, as in the days of her menstrual, she will be unclean. Then on the 8th day of the flesh of his foreskin is to be circumcised. So the male is supposed to be circumcised on the 8th day. She must wait during the blood of purification for 33 days. She is not to touch any holy thing nor come into the sanctuary until the days of her purifying are completed. But if she bears a female child, then she will be unclean for 2 weeks, as in her menstrual, and she will wait in the blood of purification for 66 days. So, as you see here, with a male, she's unclean for a week, just like when you have a menstrual. When she has a female, she's unclean for 2 weeks. When she has a male, she has to wait in the blood of her purification for 33 days before she touches any holy thing or comes into the sanctuary. She has to be purified for 33 days, and if it's a female, she has to be in the blood of purification for 66 days, so double the time. When the days of her purification are completed for a son or for a daughter, she is to bring to the Cohen, at the priest, at the entrance of the tent of meeting, a year-old lamb for a burnt offering, and a young pigeon or a turtle dove for a sin offering. He is to present it before the Lord and make atonement for her. Then she will be cleansed from the discharge of her blood. This is the Torah or the law for her who gives birth, whether to a male or a female child. If she cannot afford a lamb, then she is to bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, one for a burnt offering and the other for a sin offering. Then the priests will make atonement for her, and she will be clean. So that's the law of purification after childbirth. Okay, chapter 13. Then the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, when a man has a swelling on the skin of his body, or a scab, or a bright spot, and it becomes the plague mark of... So when it says Zerat there, that is... what my gosh, I just had a, that is, leprosy. Sorry. That's leprosy. Zarat on his flesh, and then he should be brought to Aaron and the Kohen, or to one of his sons, the Kohanim. The Kohen is to examine the plague of Zarat, which is the plague of leprosy, on his skin, and if the hair in the plague has turned white, and the appearance of the plague is deeper than the body's skin, then it is actually leprosy. Thus, the priest should examine and pronounce him unclean. So, you have to understand too, so we're going through laws now of like, God is teaching them sort of medical stuff, how to treat diseases of this time that they're in. And so, he's teaching them how to deal with people with skin conditions and diseases. Particularly leprosy, because back then leprosy was very obviously more prevalent than today, and also very deadly. If the bright spot is white on the skin of his body, but its appearance is not deeper than the skin, and its hair has not turned white, then the priest is to isolate the infected person for 7 days. So he's going to go into quarantine for 7 days, and they're just going to monitor him and see what happens. The priest should examine him on the 7th day, and behold, if he sees the plague or the leprosy has not spread on the skin, then the priest is to isolate him for 7 more days. The priest is to examine him again on the 7th day, and behold, if the plague has faded and has not spread on the skin, then the priest should pronounce him clean. It is a scab. He is to wash his clothes, and he will be clean. But if the scab spreads on the skin after he has shown himself to the priest for his cleansing, he is to show himself to the priest once again. And the priest is to examine him, and if the scab has spread on the skin, then the priest should announce him unclean. It is leprosy. And when one has a plague of leprosy, he is to be brought to the priest. The Kohen is going to examine him, and behold, if there is a white swelling in the skin, and it has turned the hair white, and there is raw flesh in the swelling, it is a chronic leprosy on the skin of his flesh, and the Kohen is to pronounce him unclean. He is to isolate him, for he is unclean. Suppose the leprosy breaks out above the flesh. And so far as it all appears in the eyes of the priests, covers all the skin of the infected person from his head to his feet, then the Kohen will see and behold, if the leprosy has covered all of his body, he is to pronounce him clean of the plague, since it has all turned white, he is clean. But whenever raw flesh appears upon him, he will be unclean. The priest is to examine the raw flesh and pronounce him unclean. The raw flesh is unclean, it is leprosy. Or if the raw flesh changes and turns white, then he must come to the priest. The priest is to examine him, and behold, if the plague has turned white, then the Kohen should pronounce him clean of the plague, and he is clean. When the body has a boil on the skin, and it has healed, but the place of the boil there is a white swelling or a bright reddish white spot, then it should be shown to the priest. And the priest is going to examine it, and behold, if its appearance is lower than the skin, and its hair has turned white, then the priest is to pronounce him unclean. It is a plague of leprosy that has broke out within the boil. But if the Kohen examines it and sees there is no white hairs within it, and if it is not deeper than the skin but has faded, then the priest is to isolate him 7 days. If it spreads in the skin, then the priest is to pronounce him unclean. It is a plague. But if the bright spot stays in that place and has not spread, it is merely the scar from the boil, and the priest is to pronounce him clean. Or suppose the body has a burn from fire on its skin, and the raw flesh of the burn becomes a bright spot, reddish white or white. Then the Kohen is to examine it, and behold, if the hair and the bright spot has turned white, and its appearance is deeper than the skin, it is leprosy. It has broken out in the burning, and the Kohen is to pronounce him unclean. It is a plague of Zarat. But if the priest examine it and sees there's no white hair in the bright spot, and it is not lower than the skin but has faded, then the Kohen is to isolate him 7 days. The priest is to examine him on the 7th day. If it has spread in the skin, then the priest is to pronounce him unclean. It is a plague of leprosy. If the bright spot stays in its place and is not spread to the skin but is faded, it is the swelling from the burn, and the priest shall pronounce him clean, for it is merely a scar from the burn. When a man or woman has a plague on the head or the chin, then the priest is to examine the plague, and behold, if its appearance is deeper than the skin, and the hair on it is yellow and thin, then the Kohen is to pronounce him unclean. It's a scab and leprosy of the head or the chin. If the priest examines the plague of the scab, and behold, its appearance is no deeper than the skin, and there is no black hair within, then the Kohen is to isolate the person infected with the scab for 7 days. On the 7th day, the Kohen is to examine the plague, and behold, if the scab has not spread, there is no yellow hair, and the appearance of the scab is no deeper than the skin. Then he should be shaved, but he is not to shave the scab. The Kohen is then to isolate the one who had the scab for 7 days more. As you can see, this all has to do with skin conditions. This was a big issue, even up to Yeshua's day, because he, healed the leper. On the 7th day, the Kohen is to examine the scab, and behold, if the scab has not spread on the skin, and its appearance is no deeper than the skin, then the priest should announce him clean. He is to wash his clothes and be clean. But if the scab spreads on the skin after his cleansing, then the priest is to examine him, and behold, if the scab has spread the skin, the priest may not look for the yellow hair. He is unclean. But if he sees the scab has stopped and black hair has grown in it, the scab is healed and he is clean. The Kohen should pronounce him clean. Suppose a man or woman has bright spots on the skin of the body, bright white spots. Then the Kohen is to examine them, and behold, if the bright spots on the skin of the body are dull white, it is harmless. It is a harmless rash out in the skin. He is clean. If a man's hair has fallen from his head, he is bald. He is clean. Oh, that's actually kind of funny. Or if the borders of his face become bald, his forehead is bald, he is clean. But if on the bald head, because you have to understand, people are going to be paranoid. I mean, if you think people are paranoid today about, the virus and all this other stuff, imagine back then where you actually had, a plague, and it was leprosy, and, it could eat your flesh off and you could die from it. Yeah, people were going to be paranoid. So if they saw a man's hair falling out, people back then were probably thought everybody had leprosy. Oh my gosh, they have leprosy. Send them to the priest. And, rightfully so. I mean, it would literally take your flesh off and you would die. But, so God's just saying, look, if a man's hair's fallen from his head, he's bald. He's clean, or if the borders of his face become bald and his forehead's bald, the guy's clean. But if the baldness or the bald forehead and there's a reddish white plague, basically a reddish white area of the skin, it is leprosy breaking out on his bald head or bald forehead. Then the priest is to examine him, and behold, if the rising of the plague is reddish white on his bald head or bald forehead, like the appearance of leprosy on the skin of the flesh, he is a man with leprosy. He's unclean. The priest should definitely pronounce him unclean. His plague mark is on his head. The one with leprosy who has the plague mark should wear torn clothes. The hair of his head is to hang loose. He's to cover his upper lip and cry, unclean, unclean. Leprosy was very, very contagious. So you actually had to let people know that there had to be an obvious appearance that you had, or obvious sign that you had leprosy. It was very contagious and very deadly. So you had to wear torn clothes, let the hair of your head hang loose, cover your upper lip and cry, unclean, unclean. All the days during which the plague is on him, he will be unclean. He is unclean. He is to dwell alone. Outside the camp will be his dwelling. It's a sad situation. It's very unfortunate, but you know, I mean, there's nothing else that can be done. It's something that's so deadly and so contagious. The only thing you could do was to isolate them outside of the camp. Now, I'm pretty sure there was someone that brought food to them, you know, but they didn't come in contact with them. But they couldn't be around all the people, so it's not like it's a harsh punishment. It's just something that had to be done. But very sad indeed, nonetheless. He's unclean. He is to dwell alone outside the camp. Also, when a garment has a mark of leprosy on it, whether it is a wool or a linen garment, whether it is woven or textured, linen or wool, leather or anything made from leather, or if the mark is greenish or reddish within the garment or in the leather or in its weaving or the texture or in anything made from leather, it is the plague of leprosy and should be shown to the priest. The priest is to examine the plague and isolate it for 7 days. Then he is to re-examine the plague on the 7th day. If the plague has spread in the garment, either in the weaving, basically, it sounds like leprosy could, I mean, just imagine somebody, again, if somebody has a very dead disease or virus, you're not going to put their clothes on. You're not going to give them to somebody else to wear. You might just have to burn them. And so basically, if it's on the fabric, the plague is a destructive mildew. It is unclean. So here we go. Like I said, he is to burn the garment or the weaving or the texture, wool or linen or anything leather in which the plague resides, for it is a destructive mildew. It is to be burned in the fire. If the priest examines it and behold the plague has not spread in the garment, either in the weaving, the texture, or anything made of leather, then the priest should command that they wash the thing which has the mark, and he is to isolate it 7 more days. Then the priest is to re-examine it after the mark has been washed, and behold, if the mark has not changed its color or has not spread, it is unclean. So this is interesting. It says the priest is to re-examine it after the mark has been washed, and behold, if the mark has not changed, okay, not changed color and has not spread, it is still unclean. You're to burn it in the fire, whether the rot is inside or outside. If the Cohen looks and sees the mark has faded, or after it has been washed, then he is to tear it out of the garment or the leather or weaving or texture. But if it appears again in the garment, either in the weaving or the texture, then that means it's spreading, and you're just gonna burn it. The garment, the weaving, the texture, the leather that you have washed, if the mark has departed from it, it is to be washed a second time, it will become clean. This is the law for the mark of leprosy in a garment of wool or linen, either weaving or texture or anything leather. It is to pronounce it clean or to pronounce it unclean. Okay, 2 more chapters. Chapter 14. So this is the law for cleansing lepers. Okay, the law for cleansing lepers. So the Lord said to Moses, saying, "This is the law of the one with leprosy. In the day of his cleansing, he should be brought to the priest, and the priest is to go outside the camp. The priest is to examine him, and behold, if the mark of leprosy is healed in one with leprosy, then the Cohen is to command that 2 clean living birds, cedar wood, scarlet, and hyssop be brought for the one being cleansed." Okay, so obviously they would have a time when they would re-examine a person who might actually be healing from leprosy. And this was the process for that. So cedar, we know cedar has a lot of essential oils, healing essential oils. Hyssop also is very cleansing. The Cohen should command them to kill one of the birds in a clay pot over living water. Living water, by the way, is anything that's moving. So, a river, a lake, a stream, the ocean, that's living water. As for the living bird, he is to take it, the cedar wood, the scarlet, and the hyssop, and dip them with the living bird into the blood of the bird that was killed over the living water. He is to sprinkle on the one being cleansed from the leprosy 7 times and pronounce him clean. Then release the living bird over the open field. The one to be cleansed must wash his clothes, shave off all his hair, and bathe himself in water. Then he should be cleansed. After that, he may come to the camp, but is to dwell outside the tent for 7 days. Then on the 7th day, he is to shave all his hair from his head, his beard, and his eyebrows. He must shave off all his hair. He is to wash his clothes and bathe his body in water. Then he will be clean. On the 8th day, he is to take 2 male lambs without blemish, a 1-year-old ewe lamb without blemish, 3/10 of a pint of fine flour as a grain offering, mingled with oil, and a pint of oil. The priest who cleanses him is to set the man who is to be cleansed, along with those items, before the Lord at the entrance of the tent of meeting. The priest should then take one of the male lambs and offer it for a trespass offering with the pint of oil and wave them as a wave offering before the Lord. Then he is to slaughter the male lamb in the place where they slaughter the sin offering and the burnt offering, in the sanctuary area. For the sin offering, like the trespass offering, belongs to the priest. It is most holy. Then the priest is to take, obviously the priest is going to get paid for his services, so there's going to be, an offering so the priest can have his meal. Then the priest is to take some of the blood of the trespass offering and dab it on the tip of the right ear of the one being cleansed, and on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. The priest should then take some of the pint of oil and pour it into the palm of his own left hand. He is to dip his right finger in the oil that is in his left hand, and sprinkle some of the oil with his fingers 7 times before the Lord. Then the priest should dab some of the rest of the oil that is in his hand on the tip of the right ear of the one being cleansed, on the thumb of the right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot, on top of the blood of the trespass offering. From what remains of the oil that is in his hand, the priest is to dab on the head of the one being cleansed. In this way, the Cohen will make atonement for him before the Lord. The priest should offer the sin offering and make atonement for the one being cleansed because of his uncleanliness. Afterward, he is to slaughter the burnt offering. Then the priest is to present the burnt offering along with the grain offering on the altar. So the priest should make atonement for him, and he will be clean. If he is poor and cannot afford so much, then he should take 1 male lamb for a trespass offering to be waved, to make atonement for him, plus 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour mingled with oil, for a grain offering, a pint of oil, 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons, such as he is able to afford. The one should be a sin offering and the other a burnt offering. On the 8th day, he's to bring him to the priest for his cleansing at the entrance of the tent of meeting of the Lord. The priest is to take the lamb of the trespass offering and the pint of oil and wave them for a wave offering before the Lord. He is to slaughter the lamb of the trespass offering. The priest is to take some of the blood of the trespass offering and dab it on the tip of the right ear of the one being cleansed, and on the thumb and on the big toe. The priest should pour some of the oil on the palm of his own left. Basically what he did before. Sprinkle it before the Lord. He's doing all the same thing with the doves and the pigeons. He's to offer one of the turtle doves or the young pigeons for what he can afford. The one for sin offering and the other for a burnt offering with the grain offering, and the priest should make atonement for him after being cleansed before the Lord. This is the law for the one who has the mark of leprosy, who is not able to afford the sacrifice for his cleansing. So, remember also that when they were in the wilderness in the tabernacle, and then later on in the temple, there was a physical manifest presence of God. Okay, like literal physical manifest presence of God with them that was tangible. I think maybe you hopefully remember that. Sorry, that you remember in past videos I talked about how God's frequency is so much higher than ours. So you have to think of it in terms of frequency, and we operate at a very much lower frequency because obviously we are still living in a fallen world after sin and the fall. So there's these procedures for being clean in the presence of God. So, just keep that in mind, because a lot of people look at this and they're just like, what is God asking of these people? But this is what he's asking. He's asking because of the fact that his presence is there, and there is a procedure to being clean so that you could be in the presence of God. So now we're getting into laws for cleaning houses. A lot of this just has to do with cleanliness. So the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, "Suppose you have come into the land of Canaan, which I give to you for a possession, and I put a mark of leprosy on a house in the land you possess. Then the one who owns the house should come and tell the priest, saying, 'Something like a mark has appeared on my house.' The priest is to order the house emptied before he goes in to examine the mark, so that nothing in the house might be made unclean. Then afterwards the priest is to enter to inspect the house. He is to inspect the mark, and behold, if the mark is on the walls of the house, with hollow streaks, greenish or reddish, and appears deeper than the wall, then the priest is to go out of the house to the door and close up the house for 7 days. Then the priest is to come again on the 7th day, and behold, if the mark has spread on the wall of the house, then the priest is to command that they take out the stones which are marked and throw them into an unclean place outside of the city. He should also have the inside of the house scraped all throughout, and they are to dump the mortar that they scraped out of the house outside of the city into an unclean place, and they may then take other stones and put them in the place of those stones. Likewise, he can take other mortar and plaster the house. But suppose the contamination returns, breaking out in the house, after he has pulled out the stones and after he has scraped the house, and has become replastered. Then the Cohen is to go and examine, and behold, if the plague has spread within the house, it is a destructive mildew inside. So these are basically just laws about, making sure you don't have mold and you don't have mildew and all of these things, because obviously you can get sick and die, from like asbestos. And they lived under conditions that would allow for these things to happen much more frequently than we have to worry about. Okay? He is to break down the house, its stones, its timber, along with the house's mortar, and carry them out of the city into an unclean place. Moreover, whoever goes into the house while it is shut up will be unclean until evening. The one who lies down in the house must wash his clothes, and he who eats in the house must wash his clothes too. But if the priest comes in and inspects it, and behold, the plague has not spread within the house after it was replastered, then he should pronounce the house clean, because the contamination is healed. In order to cleanse the house, he is to take 2 birds, cedar wood, scarlet, and hyssop. He is to clean one of the birds in a clay pot over the living water. Then take the cedar wood, the hyssop, the scarlet, the living birds, dip it in the blood, and sprinkle the house 7 times. He should cleanse the house with the blood of the bird, with the living water, with the living bird, the cedar wood, the hyssop, and the scarlet. But he is to let the living bird go out of the city into the open fields, so he is to make atonement for the house, it will be clean. This is the law for making the mark of leprosy, even for a scab or the leprosy in a garment, or the leprosy in a house, for a swelling, a scab, or a bright spot, to teach when it is unclean and when it is clean. This is the law of leprosy. Okay, guys, one more chapter, chapter 15. These are the laws about bodily discharges. Isn't this exciting? Okay, so, yeah, I mean, whether it's, there's just stuff. There's just nasty stuff that can come out, particularly when you live in this era of time that they're living in. And, by the way, they're living in the wilderness, so, even more so then, I'm assuming. Okay, last chapter. The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel and tell them, when a man has a fluid discharge from his body, because of his discharge he is unclean. This is to be his uncleanliness in his discharge, whether his body flows with his discharge or his body obstructs his discharge, it is uncleanliness. Every bed on which he has the discharge lies will become unclean, and everything he sits on will be unclean. Whoever touches his bed is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water and be unclean until evening. Whoever sits on anything on which the man who has the discharge sat is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water and be unclean until evening. Whoever touches the body of the one who has discharge is to bathe himself in water, and he's to be unclean until evening. Or if the one who has the discharge spits on someone who is clean, then he is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water and be unclean until evening. Any saddle the one who has the discharge rides will be unclean. Whoever touches anything that was under him will be unclean until the evening. Whoever carries them is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water and be unclean until evening. Also, anyone the person with the discharge touches without rinsing his hands in the water should wash his clothes and bathe him in water and be unclean until evening. A clay pot that the one with the discharge touches should be broken, and every wooden vessel should be rinsed in water. When the one who has a fluid discharge is cleansed of his issue, then he is to count for himself 7 days for his purification and wash his clothes. Then he is to bathe his body in running water, and he will be clean. On the 8th day he is to take 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons and come before the Lord at the entrance of the tent of meeting and give them to the priest. The priest is to offer them, one for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering. So the priest should make atonement for him before the Lord for his fluid discharge. If any man has an emission of semen, then he is to bathe his whole body in water and be unclean until evening. Again, guys, this just has to do with laws of cleanliness. This seems like, like a lot, but back then, you have to understand, we didn't, they weren't in the point of time that we are today. And, even if you go to other countries, there's countries that still don't follow these laws very much. In areas of Africa or India, it's just important because it keeps the spread of diseases from happening. That's all he was trying to teach them. If a man lies with a woman and there is an emission of semen, they should both bathe themselves in water and be unclean until evening. What he means by unclean until evening, remember, you have to be clean to be able to go into, whether it was the tabernacle or the tent of meeting or the later on the temple. You just had to stay away from that area because remember, again, there was a manifest presence of God. If a woman has a discharge and her discharge from her body is blood, she should be in her menstrual 7 days, and whoever touches her will be unclean until evening. Everything that, again, I keep going back to this, and I know I sound like a broken record. There's a frequency, and I really truly believe that even when a woman is on her menstrual, there is some sort of frequency change in her. Maybe it could spread to another person if they touch her. But remember, when you're reading these things, it has to do with being in this physical manifest presence of God. There was laws that had to be followed because of that reason. Okay, so no, yeah, I mean, obviously we should be following these laws today just for the simple fact of being clean, but you're talking about a people who were literally encamped around the tabernacle, which housed a very high frequency presence of God. Please keep that in mind. So if you touch her, they'll be unclean until evening. Everything she lies on with her menstrual will be unclean. So everything that she sits on will become unclean. Whoever touches her bed is to wash his clothes and to bathe himself in water and be unclean until the evening. Whoever touches anything that she sits on is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water and be unclean until evening. If it is on the bed or anything where she sits, when he touches it, he will be unclean until evening. If a man lies with her so that her menstrual gets, on him, he will be unclean for 7 days, and every bed where he lies will be unclean. Now, if a woman has a discharge of her blood for many days, not during her cycle, or if she has a discharge beyond the time of her cycle, all the days of the discharge of her uncleanliness so basically the same laws are going to apply as they do to the time that she's on her cycle, her menstrual. She's considered unclean. Every bed where she lies, all the days of her discharge, sorry. Every bed where she lies, all the days of her discharge, will be like her bed during her menstrual, and everything she sits on will become unclean, like the uncleanliness of her menstrual. Whoever touches these things will become unclean and is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water and be unclean until evening. But if she is cleansed of her discharge, and she is to count 7 days for herself, and after that she will be clean. On the 8th day she is to take 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons and bring them to the priest at the entrance of the tent of meeting. The priest is to offer one for a sin offering and then another for a burnt offering. So the Cohen will make atonement for her before the Lord for the uncleanliness of her discharge. So you are to keep the sons of Israel separate from their uncleanliness, so they will not die in their uncleanliness by defiling my tabernacle that is in their midst. Did you see what I just read? Hold on a second. Okay. I feel like that last line just proved my point. Okay? Because a lot of people, believers, non-believers, even people who are like really following God, when they read these laws, they think, like even if it was today, they're just thinking, okay, well, let's say you touch somebody. I mean, can't you just go wash your hands and you'll be considered clean? Part of it has to do with not spreading disease, actually being unclean. Like if you get something on your hands or you have some stuff on your body, you actually have to wash yourself to be unclean. But did you see what I just read? Okay, Leviticus 15:31. So you are to keep the sons of Israel separate from their uncleanliness, so they will not die in their uncleanliness by defiling my tabernacle that is in their midst. That's the whole focus here, people. His tabernacle is in the midst. That's what I keep trying to drive home. There is a manifest presence of God. Okay? There's certain, it's hard for us to grasp because there's a lot of things we can't see with our eyes and the vision that was given to us by the Almighty. We just can't see them. We can't see frequency. We can't see energies. Although some of us might sense them But what I'm saying is if if one of these things was going on and it changes your quote unquote cleanly state, and you go into the tabernacle, what's going to happen to you? You're going to die. So God is saying, okay, so make sure that you separate them from their uncleanliness so they won't die in their uncleanliness by defiling my tabernacle. So if you're unclean and you go into the tabernacle and you die, don't say he didn't tell you what to do, because he gave you very specific instructions of what to do so that you were making sure that you were clean before you came into the tabernacle. This is the Torah for the one who has a discharge, and for the one who has an emission of semen, who causes him to become unclean, as well as for her who has her period, and for the man or woman who has a discharge, or the one who lies with her who is unclean. Okay? It wasn't just about like being in your house and just like living your life. Like if you touch your wife while she's on her menstrual, you're unclean. No, they were literally surrounding the tabernacle was in the middle. The tent of meeting and the tabernacle were in the middle, and Israel encamped all around. And, you had all these different sacrifices, and imagine like, going to a congregation every day. But every time that you walk into that congregation, you got to be operating on a clean level so that when you are in the presence of the manifest presence of God, you don't die. That's exactly what he's saying in that verse, in verse 31. So that you don't die in your uncleanliness. And also too, there are parts of that, with like mold in a house, you don't want to die in the uncleanliness of a mold in your house. And having leprosy, also you don't want to spread it to other people so that they die. But a lot of it mostly has to do with the fact that by defiling his tabernacle that's in their midst, okay? This has to do with the tabernacle that was in their midst. And this manifest presence of God. Remember, they had to make the furnishings of the tabernacle out of gold. And it had to be everything was so specific, because you had God, who is up here in the third heaven, trying to put a piece of himself in the midst of the children of Israel. It doesn't work that way. You just don't. There's a major protocol, and there's things that have to happen, because there's a reason why God's not dwelling with us right as of yet. He's not going to be dwelling with us until Yeshua hands the kingdom over to his Father. There's a whole process of restoration that has to happen, because we cannot just dwell with the Father in these fleshly bodies. We would die. Don't you remember the guys who were carrying the Ark of the Covenant, and the Ark started to sort of fall, and the guy just went to, he just went to keep it from falling. It wasn't anything malicious at all. He was doing a good thing, but you can't touch it. That's like saying, oh, we're carrying this box of electricity, and if you touch it, you'll get electrocuted and die. You have to liken it to electricity. God is like, his frequency is like stronger than lightning. Just imagine how much energy is in a bolt of lightning, and then times that, like, I can't even give you a number, because God's the creator and sustainer of the entire world. And a bolt of lightning is just a little bolt of lightning. You have to think of it in terms of energy and frequency. And I know that sounds, weird, because it doesn't say that in the Bible, but that's what's being said, because God's manifest presence is in their midst. So you had to be clean in his presence. So there's something going on that, I'm sure, and science is proving these things, But you have to keep that in mind when you're reading a lot of these laws having to do with cleanliness. Okay, so that was chapter 11 through 15. So we are going to do 15. We're going to do, I think we're going to have 2 more Leviticus videos, and then we'll be done with Leviticus. So God's willing, we will have another Leviticus video soon. And then coming up eventually, I'm gonna do a video inside of the Keys to the Garden group, and I'm gonna have a book giveaway. I don't know yet how many books I'm gonna have to give away, but I will have a book to give, at least 1 book to give away for sure. Probably have 2 or 3 or 4, maybe, who knows. And whatever I can get my hands on. You're gonna really, 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 I really think you're gonna enjoy this video in the Keys to the Garden group and the book that we're gonna be discussing together. I read just the first chapter and I started crying because I just thought it was so beautiful. Anyways, hopefully you'll enjoy it. So, yeah. We'll see. Maybe I'll have time on Tuesday. We can finish up on Tuesday with more of Leviticus. If not, next Shabbat or whenever I have time. I'm hoping to keep to Shabbat, but like I said, every time I say that it's going to be on this day, something happens. So I'm just leaving it up to the Lord. I'm just leaving it all up to the Lord because there's nothing I can do. And Facebook is taking people off the page, and Facebook is shutting down my other account. So it's all in his hands. So God bless you. It was nice seeing some of you here again, and I hope to see you again soon sometime. And we'll finish up in the book of Leviticus. And I think I don't know. I got a couple of things going on in my head, so I'll let you know. Crystal, have a great Shabbat. Shabbat Shalom. And I will see you on the next video. Shabbat Shalom.